Hello and welcome to helpyourmath.com. In this video, we are going to prepare for completing the square by reviewing factoring perfect square trinomials and creating perfect square trinomials. First, let's review what a perfect square trinomial looks like. So they come in two varieties. The first one is x squared plus 2xy plus y squared. So notice we have the first term squared, the last term is squared, and this is the product of the two roots doubled. And what this factors into is it factors into the root of the first term, which would be x, plus the root of the second term. The quantity is squared. So we have root and root. For the second one, notice the difference here is the subtraction sign here. This one factors into root minus root quantity squared. So we have x squared minus 2xy plus y squared. Now let's review factoring perfect square trinomials. So if we're going to factor a perfect square trinomial, we have our two things to keep in mind. We have x squared plus 2xy plus y squared, and we have x squared minus 2xy plus y squared. What is our first example? That's the second flavor, x squared minus 2xy plus y squared. Remember what this is. This is the root of the first. This is the root, right? So it's the first term and the last term should be perfect squares. And then the middle term should be the product of the two, x times 3, doubled. So x times 3, in this case, it's going to be a negative because of that negative. So that would be minus 2 times 3 times x would be minus 6x, which is exactly what we see. So this is a perfect square trinomial, and it's going to factor into root minus root quantity squared. How about x squared minus 10x plus 25? First term's a perfect square. We have x quantity squared. The last term's a perfect square. That would be 5 squared. And the middle term, again, we have another minus sign. Is this minus 2 times 5 times x? Yes, it is. This is minus 2 times 5 times x. That's good news. That means this is a perfect square trinomial, and it's going to factor into x minus 5 quantity squared. And last but not least, we have x squared plus 14x plus 49. Is that a perfect square trinomial? The first term is a perfect square, right? That's x squared. The last term is a perfect square. That's 7 squared. And the middle, this 14x, this is a plus, so we're talking about this first formula here. Is that 2 times the first root times the second root? Yes, it is. That's 2 times x times 7, which would be 14x. So this one will factor into root plus root quantity squared. The last thing we need to be really good at is creating a perfect square trinomial. So what we see is we're given 2/3 of a perfect square trinomial. We're given the x squared plus the 2xy. What we have to do is we have to figure out what that third piece is, the third term is. And so what we do is we take this middle, remember what this middle term was? This is 2 times x times y. And remember, this one's x quantity squared. This last one is y quantity squared. So what we're looking for is we already know the x, right? That should be given to us. What we're looking for is the 2y. So we're going to keep this in mind as we look at our next example. I'm just going to put our y squared up there. And of course, we could also have x squared minus 2xy plus y squared. So we'll get to that when we need it. Okay, so we have x squared plus 12x plus what would give us a perfect square trinomial? So what would that third term be for this to be a perfect square trinomial? And again, what we know is we know that 12 times x is equal to 2xy. So what that means is if we want to get y by itself, so I'm going to divide both sides by 2x, and we end up with 6 equaling y. Now, do we put 6 in the blank? No, because it's y squared goes in the blank, so this should be 6 squared, which is 36. Then this would factor, it doesn't ask us to, but this would factor into x plus 6 quantity squared. Now, a shortcut rather than setting up this little equation every time, which you're welcome to do, but just a little shortcut to get that third term is take the coefficient, right? We're going to ignore the x because the x usually is a result of that first term. Take the coefficient of the middle term. So take the coefficient of middle term. I'm just going to say coef of middle term. And what we're going to do with it is we're going to divide it by 2, right? We divide it by 2. And then that's going to be the root. So taking that coefficient, dividing it by 2, this is the root of the third piece, or of the third term. But we don't want the root, we want the root squared. So we're going to take that thing, and then we're going to square it. So I'm just going to call this m because we have middle. It's going to be m divided by 2, quantity squared. Let's look at another example. We have y squared minus 28y plus what? What do? We're going to take that middle coefficient, negative 28. We're going to divide it in half. Negative 28 divided by 2 is negative 14. And then we square the whole thing, square all of negative 14. This third term will always be positive because you're always squaring, whether it's positive or negative, you're squaring it, turning it positive. Negative 14 quantity squared is 196. So this would be a perfect square trinomial if we added 196, and it would factor into y minus 14 quantity squared. In our last example, we have n squared minus 9n plus what? Okay, so remember what we do. We're going to take this middle coefficient, minus 9. We're going to cut it in half. That would be minus 9 halves. So there's our root. Minus 9 halves is the root. Now we square it. And again, negative squared turns positive. 9 squared is 81. 2 squared is 4. So the third term will be 81 over 4. And this would factor into n minus 9 over 2 quantity squared. These have been examples of reviewing perfect square trinomials and creating perfect square trinomials. Thank you for stopping by, and good luck with completing